Shaheen, are we ready? Okay. Stephen, I'll turn it to you.
All set? Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen Bird. I'm the new director of the Carsey School of Public Policy, and 8 weeks on the job, and absolutely loving the New Hampshire Seacoast area in New Hampshire. So I'm a migrant from New York. Sometimes that can get sort of rough response, but it's not quite as bad as Massachusetts, so that's okay. And I'm really, really happy to be here. The Carsey School has been around for a little more than a decade, endowed by Marcy Carsey. We have 4 master's programs: Masters of Public Policy, Masters of Public Administration, Global Conflict and Human Security, and Masters in Community Development, and 4 research centers that do broad-based impact and implementation of public policy focused on demography, social policy, impact finance, and a group called New Hampshire Listens that does a lot of work focused on implementation and engagement with communities. And so I'm here to welcome you all on behalf of President Chilton and Provost Jones. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first Carsey School event, and kind of excited, but I'll keep it short so that we can focus on the conversation. I'm going to introduce you to Tim Horgan, who's the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, and already becoming a colleague in crime with me, which I appreciate a great deal. We met on my 3rd day on the job. And anyway, I'm really happy to host this event and to welcome the Senator and the Director here for this great conversation, thinking really hard about international affairs, trade and development, and the ways in which public policy intersects with all of those components. So with no more ado, Tim.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate your support and your help in securing this wonderful space for us, helping spread the word here on campus, and helping to bring this together. So we're really appreciative of all of the centers and departments here on campus who helped make this happen, with the Political Science and International Affairs Department, as well as the Center for Business Analytics. I know Nagaraj is somewhere in here, but oh, there he is, hiding back there. So thank you so much for helping to spread the word and helping to bring together such a great in-person audience, as well as a wonderful online audience. We actually have 6 different countries represented in our online audience and 11 states, and that's just who registered. So we know that these conversations are important. We know that these conversations are of interest to the broader community, and we thank everyone for taking the time to join us. As I said, or as Stephen said, I guess, my name is Tim Horgan. I'm the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, a nonprofit, nonpartisan center here in the state that helps people really have conversations about what's going on around the world. We do that in a number of ways, through speakers programs like this, through podcasts, through international visitor exchanges, and through diplomacy simulations that we're bringing into high school classrooms these days. So I'll end it there. Just know that, of course, for both ourselves and the university, this is not an endorsement of any political policy, party, or anything of that nature. Everyone's ideas are their own, and we are simply the platform for conversation. So I want to kick it over and get things started so that we can make sure we have enough time for the conversation and for community questions. I will be looking at my phone throughout the night. That is just to make sure that we are getting the questions from online. If you want to send them into council@wacnh.org or using our chat function on our website. We'll be happy to take those questions when it comes time. I am actually going to now move and close this door, but while I do that, I'll take a moment to introduce Senator Shaheen. Senator Shaheen is the senior senator from New Hampshire. She sits on some very key committees in the Senate, including entrepreneurship and small business, being the senior member for that one, on foreign affairs, armed services, and one other one. Appropriations, that's right. That's the important one to remember. Jeez. Maybe not the most fun and exciting one, but the important one to remember. So Senator Shaheen has done a lot with our organization over the years, including a wonderful conversation post-NATO summit earlier this summer. So Senator, please join us up here. Thank you. And we're also excited to have the director of the U.S. Trade and Development Association, no agency. I thought I was going to get it right, but we'll work on it. Director Ebong has been with the agency for 3 years now, going into 4. This agency is basically your opportunity to work with the U.S. government on sustainable infrastructure projects around the world. She'll do a much better job of explaining what that actually looks like than I can, but she has a career in the legal field, and when the government came calling, she felt the need to serve, and we're very glad that she and her team reached out to us for this wonderful event. So Director Ebong, if you want to join us. All right. So let's get that on. I'll give that to you, Senator. So tonight's conversation is really focused in on the intersection of what we call commercial diplomacy, national security, and foreign affairs. These are 3 areas in which the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire has been very interested in, our audiences have been very interested in, and of course, these 2 lovely ladies have been interested in for quite a while, I would have to imagine. So the idea being that we are working around the world to have the opportunity to benefit different countries, to benefit U.S. businesses, and benefit the global economy. So I'd like to start with you, Senator Shaheen, and just talk a little bit about how does the work of USTDA and other similar programs help with what you're very concerned about on the Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committee in terms of national security?
Well, first of all, welcome, everyone. It's nice to have all of you join us for this conversation tonight, and hope you will have lots of good questions for us. And I don't know, how many students are in the audience do we have? All right, good. Nice to have the students join us. As governor, I led the first trade mission overseas, and Don Wivel, who was then the head of our trade office in New Hampshire, was sort of the person who introduced me to how important trade is in terms of not just our economy, but in our security as well. I spend a lot of time on the Foreign Relations Committee and the Armed Services Committees talking about national security and listening to the challenges that we face with national security. And we know that there are a couple of ways to address it. One is military power, which has been so much of the focus of security issues really for the last couple of decades. But the other is soft power. And soft power is a way to build relationships that are critical, that help us avoid conflict. And that's one of the things that trade is important in doing. I've been in a lot of countries in the last few years, and everywhere I've been, they want to see more trade with the United States. And that's what the U.S. Trade Development Agency helps do, is make that happen, and make it happen in a way that invests in infrastructure, that makes it possible for countries around the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America and in the Indo-Pacific, to be able to develop that relationship. And as we think about the challenges that we have in the U.S. and with our future, with the threat from China and the PRC, China's Belt and Road Initiative has been one way for them to expand their influence across Africa, across Latin America, even across Europe. And having the ability to provide an alternative for countries that allows us to help them make investments in their own futures, their own economies, is really critical. And just one of the things that has struck me, again, everywhere I've been, Latin America. I was in Latin America last year. We visited 4 countries, Panama, Colombia, Argentina, and Brazil. And everywhere we went, they said, we want to do business with the United States. We would rather do business with the United States than with China because you're a better partner. But if we don't have any way to do that, if we don't have any investment, if you're not able to help us, then we're going to look at the alternative. And so that's why what Director Ebong and what the U.S. Trade Development Agency does, along with so many of our other agencies, is so important. That's a long answer, but...
We like long answers because it actually gets to the key issues rather than just the sound bites. So never apologize for a long answer, in my opinion. But Director Bong, how can the USTDA help support U.S. national security? And can you give us some examples maybe of some of the projects that your agency has worked upon?
Absolutely, Tim. And first I have to say thank you to the World Affairs Council, to the University of New Hampshire. It is always really exciting to be on campus. And to the Senator, really for all your amazing work, often in a very bipartisan, collaborative way to get us as a country where we need to be in a very globally competitive, challenging environment. And you've also very nicely laid the table for how USTDA works in this space and really the impact of the kind of work that we do on national security. I think as the Senator has said, national security really is critical to us here in the United States in so many ways. Yes, of course, there is defense, there is joint operations in a military sense, there's sharing information with allies and partners, there's leveraging all of the resources and being able to ensure that there's access to resources in an equitable way. There's also economic security. And all of these lead to a sense of national security. They're all related. But it's true from our perspective to see and to understand that national security is not just solely missiles, tanks, weaponry, but as the Senator said, soft power, and for us that includes technology, and that includes infrastructure. And that's where an agency like the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and I'll use our acronym here on out as USTDA, comes in. So we are focused on supporting the development of high-quality infrastructure in developing and middle-income economies. And we do so in critical large infrastructure spaces like clean energy, like digital infrastructure, like transportation and healthcare infrastructure. And we work across the world in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Caribbean, and of course the Indo-Pacific. We think it important to be able to address infrastructure challenges from the earliest stages. So the way we get engaged is to provide grant funding for the kinds of activities that will help to stand up quality infrastructure. So feasibility studies, technical assistance, and pilot projects. But the critical piece for us here in America, for us in New Hampshire, across our country, is that we do so in a way that engages the US private sector, US companies, in these infrastructure projects at an early stage. So US companies do the project preparation work that I've described. Why is this important? Because our competitors, as in China and others, are doing exactly the same thing. And if they're left alone to do that, they will set the standards for infrastructure that is built. And often when those standards are set, they exclude our companies and what we can bring. So it's very important to think about the landscape of national security, to engage this kind of soft power activity that brings us and our companies, but not just that, it's our innovations, it's our solutions, it's the way in which we do business that our partners do want, would rather, actually, but it's really critical to make that accessible. And that's what the agency does. I'll give just two short examples. One, we've focused over the last few years quite heavily in the Indo-Pacific, and been working in a sector that is very critical, actually, to national security, because it engages privacy, it engages data. So this area of subsea cables and fiber optic cables. And so we've been working to bring in US companies by providing feasibility study grant works, allowing countries that don't have a lot of technical resources or money to do this kind of important preparation work on their own. So making it possible for them to get the expertise of the United States in this field. So I'm very proud about a project that we're doing in the Pacific Islands, where we have funded a Central Pacific cable grant to help Tuvalu, tiny island, get its first landing cable landing, and will also bring connectivity to 12 different Pacific Island countries. This is critical. Access to the internet, access to connectivity will help economic growth, will help and bring opportunity. And I just have to mention SOBCOM in Newington, New Hampshire, because I was just there. They were very kind. They spent 2 hours with us, actually going through their manufacturing capability and their assembly. It's extraordinary, and I learned so much. And it's important for me to understand how our companies manufacture. And we had supported SOBCOM in a bid, very competitive bid, where they came up against the Chinese firm HMN Technologies to lay a 17,000-mile cable from Singapore to France, going around Africa. And there are many countries involved in this endeavor who may not, again, have the technical expertise or be very fully developed. So we offered the consortium of companies, if they chose SOBCOM LLC to undertake this massive infrastructure, that we would support them by training their people so that they could sustain this investment. That is a critical difference with some of our competitors. We believe in the sustainability of the investment. The good news is SOBCOM won, and it was whole of government because the Commerce Department did advocacy. And I get to then come and visit and see how they will fulfill this. And it is a privilege, and it's also a great pleasure, because we can see the impact of the work, and we can see the context of all the work that's done through Congress, through the administrations, to make sure that America keeps its place in the global environment and is able to fulfill our values, really, as well, because that's an important part of it. I'll stop there. I think I've been too long.
No, that's great. Always like a good New Hampshire shout out. In your remarks, you kind of touched on all of these points, but USTDA works in 5 distinct infrastructure areas. Can you just enlighten our crowd as to what those areas are as they think about what the kind of work you do?
Yes, certainly. So we tend to be, as you'll notice, I talked a lot about the private sector. So we're very driven by places and sectors where the US is really strong, right? Where we can offer innovation and technological solutions. So that does mean very much so the energy space, particularly clean energy. It means transportation, everything from intelligent transportation systems to rail, to intermodal, to looking at how we can actually efficiently reduce emissions in the sector, work like that. And then digital infrastructure, I talked a bit about the cabling work, but we're also very concerned with access, right? Access to underserved communities, rural communities, learning what we can from our work here in this country with similar communities, actually, to help to inform as many people as we can, because connectivity, again, will help economic growth. The amount of agricultural improvements that can be made through technology, but if you can't get access to the internet, you can't actually utilize this. So digital infrastructure is really, really important. A growing portfolio for us is healthcare infrastructure, both in terms of delivery, in terms of building actually greenfield or brownfield infrastructure, in terms of harmonization. Maybe we'll get a little bit into partnerships and global relationships and interconnections between countries. Even in a sector like healthcare, if you think about the harmonization of regulations, which is so important so that pharmaceutical goods can enter countries or regions. This kind of work, I think, is also critical to what we do. So those are the 4 key sectors that we work in.
Great. So you mentioned alliances and partnerships. So let's turn back to Senator Shaheen here. We talked at our last event with you about NATO and the importance of alliances and partnerships around the world. How do you think about alliances and partnerships as we approach this work?
Well, one of the things that also helps ensure our national security, helps make the U.S. strong, is our alliances. And we're fortunate that we have lots of friends in Europe and around the world. I talked about going to the Indo-Pacific. Earlier this year, I was in Philippines, Vietnam, South Korea, and Japan. And one of the things that really struck me in all of the official meetings that we had with people was how interested they were in partnering with the United States. I expected that in Japan and South Korea because we've had a long relationship with both of those countries. I was surprised in the Philippines because, as you may remember, the former president there, Duterte, was not a friend of the United States. He was not a supporter of democracy. And I sort of expected the current president to have taken that approach, but he was very supportive of the United States and talked about not just how important the partnership was with the United States, but also talked about their concern about what China is doing in their territorial waters, about China's efforts to interfere with maritime commerce, about what that means for the Philippines. And so it was reassuring to hear that from him. I also didn't expect it from Vietnam, where we met with the second highest ranking communist official, because it's still a communist country. And Vietnam was very excited. They talked about their new strategic partnership with the United States and how pleased they were to have that. And they also talked about their concerns about China in their territorial waters, what that meant for their waters and what they govern and what it means for maritime commerce. So it was really encouraging to hear from those officials about just their interest in partnering with the United States, and to feel like we have a strategy in the Indo-Pacific. It's a strategy that we're still working on, but is making a difference, and those allies share the concerns we have about the threats in the Indo-Pacific. And again, everywhere we went, what we heard was more trade with the United States. How can we do more with the United States? And, you know, as the director says, it's one way for us to support those countries, but also to cement the relationships that we have with those countries. That's in our interest as well as their interest.
And Director, can you talk a little bit about how alliances and partnerships play into your work? Is this something that is only available for our allies and partners? Is this something that we can take to countries that we haven't worked with before? How do you guys view that relationship as you do your work?
I think it's so important. And yes, part of every single initial undertaking in a country for us very much involves partnering with the project sponsors on the ground, the people who are going to build and implement these large infrastructure projects. And actually, maybe some others, not so large ones as well. We do arrange it. And that's important because you can't reach everybody if you're only at a certain scale. So we make sure to engage very, very directly with project sponsors, both in the public and the private sector. We can work with both. And to underscore the importance of understanding the landscape, we have made sure to actually work with local staff overseas in 12 locations. We have locally employed staff who help us to understand the business environment, to understand the cultural landscape, and to understand the priorities of people on the ground. And the projects that we developed are very much done in arm with our partners on the ground and our partners in the private sector as well. We have to understand the capabilities, we have to understand the interests, the business likelihood, the likelihood of investment. And so those partnerships are critical. I do also, though, want to talk about the partners of ours that are our allies and our like-minded partners. I think it's very important. And I think in this administration, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment has really tried to underscore the need, and it's a G7 plus Japan actually, engagement, where it's taking a whole of partner approach to addressing some of the infrastructure challenges which will facilitate trade in developing economies. And I think that kind of holistic approach helps to engender a commonality of interest and focus, and therefore result. And I come back to results so much in the work that we do, because it's the only thing I think that gives people faith and understanding and belief in what can be done. And so for us, in sort of concrete terms, our portfolio in the Indo-Pacific that we've been working on, particularly in the Pacific Islands, could not have been done without the partnership of Japan and Australia and New Zealand, because they've been in the region for a really long time. And so we've worked hand in hand and partnered up, exchanged project pipelines, seen where the other can jump in and help out. And it's to great effect. And I think it's really important to continue along those lines. I also, I want to mention one project, if I can, because I think it sort of demonstrates partnership on many levels. And I've talked a lot about technologies and new technologies. Well, in the search for cleaner energy, we're looking at everything to help to contribute to that, including civil nuclear energy, in particular advanced technologies with respect to civil nuclear, like small modular reactors, which for many reasons can actually be a little bit more manageable to construct and to operate. They're still in development, but they are moving, and the Department of Energy, okay, not USTDA, but US government, thank you, have for the last couple of years set up a partnership for transatlantic energy and climate cooperation, PTEC, as it goes by, to help countries in Eastern Europe and the United States think about how to be prepared, both in a regulatory sense and a policy sense, again, to sort of harmonize viewpoints with respect to being able to stand up, accept, and use small modular reactor technology. That kind of unity in approach really helps to develop a sector. And so it allows us as the practical, pragmatic project preparers to help support the technology development along with our amazing labs. I won't digress into my visits to the Idaho National Lab, but really doing amazing work, and the companies that are developing these technologies. So we supported in Ukraine before the war, looking at how to be prepared from a regulatory sense, what you need to do to license this type of technology. We supported in Romania siting studies and a feed study, a front-end engineering design study for one of these small modular reactors developed by a US company from the state of Oregon called NuScale. Just this past summer, at the last PTEC meeting, we celebrated an important milestone in Romania, which is going into the second phase of the front-end engineering design study for this small modular reactor developed by NuScale in Romania at, believe it or not, a disused coal mine, a site for a previous coal mine. This project brought in the Romanian government, the US government, the private sector that contributed. It's a whole constellation of partners to get this off the ground and get this going. So partnership is critical. Relationships on a policy level are similarly absolutely critical. In fact, they're fundamental to the ability of agencies like ours to partner. And it really does secure us here at home, as well as our partners and allies overseas as well. And we really can't do without it.
Yeah, let me just to add to that, because so much of the conversation so far has been about the benefits to countries that we're investing in, the national security benefits. But I want to talk about the economic benefits, because you talked about Subcom, you talked about the Oregon company. I chair the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee in the Senate. And in 2010, we set up a program called STEP. It's an investment that allows small businesses to get grants to help get into international markets. And we know that about 95% of markets are outside of the United States. Only about 4% of small and medium-sized businesses are actually doing business outside of the United States. And so helping those small businesses get into international markets, whether Subcom doesn't really have those challenges in the same way, but we have a number of other small businesses that do. I think we've got about over 2,000 businesses in New Hampshire that are actually benefiting from working with USTDA, with other international support efforts to get into international markets. And that's good for business in New Hampshire. It's good for those small businesses. You know, we do about, you mentioned Romania, we do about $7 billion in trade a year. About half of that is in European trade. And making sure that we can support that and support those small businesses is really important, because it's jobs, it's being able to be recession-proof. One of the things I've learned early on about trade is that those trade jobs tend to pay more, they tend to be more recession-proof, they tend to have better benefits. And so Dawn's laughing because she knows I learned those lessons. But that's one of the benefits for our businesses in New Hampshire, to have an agency like USTDA that can help make those international connections and the relationships that you talk about.
Can I add? I'm sorry, Tim, sorry, you don't want to hijack this, but just to add to that, because...
We are here to hear from both of you, so please.
But just on the point, Senator, that you just made with respect to the small businesses, it's critical to what we do, actually. I mean, a full 60% of our agency's work. And in that, I'm including how we make our decisions, right? Because we have to work with experts. We don't have all of the technical expertise within the agency. So the vast majority of our work is advised upon by small businesses, and they also participate. We are very focused on having them engaged in the opportunities overseas. It's part of what I've been doing this summer in going across different states to get the word out about what we do and open up that window of opportunity, because you know what? Many of the small businesses have the innovation, actually, and are creating the technologies. And so it's really important to engage and to absolutely open the markets. It's not just about the big businesses, although we serve both as well. But that point about small businesses and engagement is critically important for us as we go around doing our work.
Well, and that's a great segue to the next question, which is, in small businesses, the U.S. government has a big interest in seeing more minority-owned, women-owned businesses being able to access some of these programs. We know, Senator Shaheen, this is something that you've been very concerned about and helped push forward some legislation recently around it. So what are your thoughts? How can we get more women involved in these types of programs? And what value does that bring not only to U.S. businesses, but to the countries that we're working with in what may not be the most equal places around the world?
Well, first of all, women-owned businesses are the fastest growing sector of the small business community. So we're seeing that happen. And the director can talk more about internationally, but I can tell you one of the things that I've worked on in the Foreign Relations Committee is something called the Women, Peace, and Security Act. The United States was the first country in the world to pass legislation that said, basically, we need to invest in ensuring that when there are conflict areas, that women are at the table in those conflict areas, because we have data that shows that when women are at the table, that negotiations that end conflicts last about a third longer than when women are not at the table. So we also know that countries that empower women tend to be more stable because women give back more to their families, to their communities, and usually to their countries than men. Sorry for all you men in the audience. This is data. And so making sure that we have opportunities for women across the world is really important. It's important for our foreign policy, it's important for our economic future, and it's important for the countries that we're working with to ensure that women have those opportunities. And I know you have lots of examples that you can speak to.
Thank you so much. I think it's critical from an infrastructure perspective, similar to that in peace and negotiations, that women who are the users of infrastructure be engaged in infrastructure development. And for me, I think I would not be true to my roots in many ways if I didn't see it that way. So I'm clearly an immigrant. I was born in Nigeria, and it's interesting. It's you mentioned community. I feel like in many ways I was raised by an army of aunties, right? Everybody's your auntie in Nigeria. And you may not even, they're definitely not blood relatives, but they seem magically deputized to kind of like bring you up and make sure that you're doing all that you can. Interestingly,
My husband's Lebanese. In his case, it's all cousins. They're all cousins, not aunties.
Yes, so it's the same thing. Like everybody's engaged, but critically to make sure that you can be all that you can be. And yes, there's a tight leash going up there in Lagos, and everything is yes, auntie, no, auntie. But what did you say, auntie? I'll make sure to do it. But it was with a sense of actually ensuring that you grow up to be a contributing member of your community wherever it is. Tie that to how I saw women not having, you know, electricity to cook or constant supply of water, or having to conduct market business by light, by kerosene light. Clearly, my interest comes very much from that experience. And I think that it has carried me along the way to see the importance of engaging women in the decisions that are being made about the very substance of how they're able to conduct their lives and support their families. So for us, that means seeking out infrastructure development projects that are led by women in the countries which we engage. I am super proud of a number of these projects. I'm going to mention actually two. They both happen to be in Nigeria. Oh, I guess that doesn't look so good. But it really, they were developed way before I became the head of this agency. But where, in one case, a project developer named Habiba Ali has made it her life's work to provide power by solar mini-grids in the northern part of Nigeria, where electricity is scant. And she's doing it for whole communities, not just women, and making an impact. Another is Dr. Fumi Adewara, who has a vision about being able to make healthcare access and make it accessible by telehealth, but doing so in a way that uses the broad diaspora of Nigerian doctors all over the world who can speak the languages of the people in these rural areas. Innovative work, just looking for support to start, and they have the push. In fact, they're both getting financing for their projects and moving on. So those are small projects, but they're examples of the critical, and you really have to be intentional about looking for these projects and encouraging and developing them. I would also say just two last things. One, it matters that we kind of walk the walk, right? So I could go out talking about this, but what does my agency look like in terms of the ability of women to progress and to lead? And I'm really proud of the fact that over 50% of our women leaders have grown in this agency. The leaders of the largest portfolios in the agency, Indo-Pacific and Africa, are women. And we make sure also, as I mentioned, to ensure that those who are giving us advice are not only small businesses, but female-owned businesses as well. That number I'm determined to do better at. It's around 22% of the value of our contracts that are let to women, and I think we can do far better. I mean, the government target is 5%, which I just don't even, I can't even talk about, but I know we can do better. And then the last thing I'll say is, it matters how we show up. It's a small thing, but it does matter, and how we approach things. Your legislation, it messages what's important. And I think the impact is real. I can go into a room like I did not so many months ago in a West African country. I come with my 80% women delegation, yay, but I'm met by a wall of men. And I mean the men at the table and the men behind the men at the table, all men. But what was interesting to me was what happened next, which was the words of the senior official kind of looked at us and said his first words, "I'm sorry I don't have any women in my delegation." I was almost blown out of my seat. That would not have happened, but 5 years ago. So how we show up, how we express our values, how we push for legislation that underscores these values really matters.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I will also mention we've hit Romania, we've hit Ukraine and Nigeria. Now we need to get Algeria, Morocco, and Kenya mentioned so that everybody gets their shout out. And we're going to challenge you with that now as we turn it over to the audience, which is going to make it even more challenging. But we want to get questions from the audience. I have a great one here online that I really want to get to, so we're going to start there. Nick Watson, who is a teacher at Bow High School, wants to know, as a high school studies teacher, how can I bring real-world engagement to my students regarding the work that you are doing? I'll let either of you.
I'll start. One, I think it's really important to talk about our internships. Although they start at college level, I always like to get people knowledgeable early. And this whole notion of commercial diplomacy and what we do to support trade and development, I think is one that I just love to engage. I just actually the other day spoke to a high school student who was so knowledgeable, but had just reached out to me randomly. I do this because I think it's important. So for high school students, I would say keep the curiosity, and it's not too early to connect with people that seem to be doing something that's interesting to you, and to keep in touch with them, because that's often how we hire people. And certainly the internship programs that start from college age, which are described at our website, www.ustda.gov. My public affairs would not be happy if I didn't say that. Will also fully describe how you can get engaged from the point that you're in college as well.
Certainly internships are an important way to engage young people. We have high school students who also do internships in our Senate office here, not in Washington, but here in New Hampshire, where we have a number of offices, so we can usually accommodate anybody from any part of the state. Sarah's making a face up there. But these are, the days of Zoom and technology, so there are ways to engage. One of the things we've talked about in our office is when we're doing international trips, to think about how we get some young people who can engage with us on the trip by Zoom, who can talk at we can talk to at different stops and talk about what we're seeing and what they might answer questions and see what they might be interested in. I think, Tim, when we talked about the NATO summit, one of the things we talked about is the fact that we had 4 students from New Hampshire who happened to be in DC doing internships. One was from our office, but the others were doing different internships, and we were able to get them into the NATO summit to see what was going on behind the scenes. So I think we got to be creative, and I hope that teachers will reach out to us, because that's another way. The Bo teacher, reach out to us, see how we can help you talk to your students about what the opportunities are and why it's important that they engage internationally.
And hold on, Don. Wait for the mic just so that people online can hear.
Have to remind you that when you did the trade mission to Mexico, we had a student from Bow High School with us. Do you remember? And she went with us when, she went with us when she asked if she could please go. She was so scared we would say no. She was amazing. She went with us when you had your meeting with President Fox. So it was like a huge thing for her. She went back to school, gave a presentation to the entire student body, and they started an international function or whatever at Bow High School. So this teacher needs to restart this. But that was, I just had to remind you of that. Yeah.
Okay. I will also give our shameless plug that what better way to find great internships than coming to World Affairs Council events, having the opportunity to meet with and talk to amazing leaders who can give you the ins and outs of how to get these. So hope you'll join us at the next in-person events that we have. All right, questions from the audience. I see Bill's got one here.
You know, you mentioned sort of the competition with the China.
Introduction.
Oh, I'm Bill DeVries, emeritus from I taught here for decades. Philosophy. You mentioned the competition with the Chinese Belt and Roads effort, and one of the criticisms I've heard of that, the Chinese effort, is that, you know, they'll come in, but they'll come in with things already designed, and they'll even bring in Chinese laborers to do it. So there's almost nothing really left other than some structure. There's no design competence, no operational competence that really gets even trickled down, not even trickled down to the country. So it's really a fairly empty benefit to them. What are you doing when you do this to try and ensure that's not going to happen, that you're going to leave design knowledge and operational competence behind,
Yes.
and enrich the country rather than just sort of put a badge on it or something like that?
No, thank you so much. And it's so important. And I feel that we in the US government, in collaboration with each other, do a really important job of keeping to the forefront sustainability of infrastructure that we're developing. So for us, we make sure, very practically speaking, that our grants are done, yes, with US expertise. US companies will do that grant, but they have to make sure that they are subcontracting with local participants as well, up to at least 20% of the grant. You know, practically speaking, with the assistance, we want to make sure there's that engagement. But beyond that, I mentioned the training that we do in a competitive situation. So if they selected the US firm, we will go above and beyond whatever the procurement requires to be able to train, so that the investment can be sustainable over time. There are a couple of ways that we've seen it important to really address this issue. One is actually to train on the issue of procurement. It's really important that you ensure that you are getting the value of your investment. This is expensive stuff, and there's nothing cheap about paying for it twice to be redone or done over, or for it to sit like a white elephant and not be able to be used because there's some flaws with the design. So what we have done as an agency back in 2013, stood up a global procurement initiative to teach procurement officials around the world about life cycle cost analysis and best value determination in procurement. If you're looking at, I'm not going to just dispute it, our products, our technologies are expensive. But if you look at the life cycle over time, because they'll last longer, the cost is actually not as expensive as you would think. So that ability to take that kind of analysis is critical, and to make those determinations in a way that is using the best international procurement practices and is free of corruption, I think is also critical. And I can't say enough about sister agencies like the US Agency for International Development that does a lot to train and to help to build capacity. Our Peace Corps that, again, does a tremendous amount to help communities in a lasting way. And it's why, as the center said at the beginning, our partners actually want to work with us. It would be their choice. We just have to make sure that the choice is easily understood, the alternatives are clear, and that the ability to join not just the preparation but the financing is really critical. And there, as an agency, even though we're in at the early stages, more and more we have been focused on connecting our partners and our projects to financing, both from our sister agencies like the International Development Finance Corporation, from the Export-Import Bank of the United States, but importantly, from multilaterals, from private banks, from regional banks, banks that will be able to understand our values, our criteria, and finance these projects that need to be stood up.
Okay, we are at 7 o'clock, which is I know the time that we said we would wrap up, but with everyone's approval, I'd like to finish up with one final question, if there's one here in the audience.
Hi, I'm Sue Tatton, and I live in Barrington, New Hampshire. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer, Botswana, many moons ago, but just finished a program, Arukale, by the way. I'm Yeye Oloja in Ajibemedele in Nigeria. I'm a chief in Nigeria.
Unfortunately, I don't speak Yoruba, but I understood that you are.
I knew you would understand.
Yes.
So I just finished a program. My company, I work for Cadmus Company, which is also Nathan Associates, which Nathan has now been merged with Cadmus. And I just finished a program in Liberia, 4 years in Liberia, on a policy dialogue activity, and we did a lot with National Single Window, trying to get trade linkages with other countries around the world and to improve the infrastructure in Liberia. Now, when you were talking about having wonderful projects and infrastructure projects, what I discovered was we would have great development projects ready to go, but the basics were not there, like electricity. So I would walk into a ministry and there would be no electricity. So any kind of digital programming that we wanted to do couldn't be done because the basic infrastructure was not there. So my question is, working with US missions, because obviously you have to work with the mission in the country, and with USAID, because my project was a USAID project. So how does that all work, and how are you ensuring that there's not duplication of effort so that indeed your projects can be sustainable?
Thank you so much, and congratulations on that chieftainship. It's not easy to come by, so congratulations. It's a really important point, this point of coordination, to avoid duplication and to be effective. And the point about the fact that you need basic infrastructure, which is why clean energy and energy is one of our largest portfolios. I think the key is two things. One, I would say there's been great value to some of the large initiatives, and I know sometimes initiatives sets off a negative feeling, but actually the ones I'm going to talk about really have focused to holding all of us in the executive branch to account, to show results. So the first is Power Africa, where there was a real concerted effort for the agencies across the executive branch, using their different skill sets, to be all on the same platform, to reach the kind of groundbreaking small, medium, and large projects that could move the bar to getting the megawatts of power and electricity in Africa increased. And they're still counting those numbers. It's still operating. The other is Prosper Africa, which was started in a previous administration, but we've continued, which is looking at how to increase two-way trade by supporting infrastructure. And I think that ability to coalesce around initiatives that have metrics, that have results, that everybody has a clear idea of what it is that they are engaged in and who is doing what, I think is really a key to that kind of coordination. I also think work that we do, but we don't necessarily talk about a lot, is the back office interagency coordination that occurs. I meet frequently with my fellow heads of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, DFC that I just mentioned, the Export-Import Bank. Our staff, our teams share project pipelines all the time. We're trying to find those synergies so that we are leveraging each other's tools and doing so effectively. Does it always work? Do we communicate clearly enough about it? I think there are lots of improvements that can be made there, but be assured that we are making efforts to try and coordinate, to collaborate, and to get the message out there so that it's clear for all of our companies, irrespective of size, and all of our partners, how best to work with us.
Okay, well, I'd like to end all of these conversations with an opportunity for our speakers to leave any final thoughts or words about this conversation we've had here tonight about the intersection of commercial development, national security, foreign policy, how these all work together. So maybe we'll go to you first, Director, and then finish up with the Senator.
Well, I'll just say, first again, thank you. Thank you for coming. I will say that I'm really hopeful and I am very optimistic about the potential and the possibility for making a difference around the world. Yes, in my field of infrastructure development as a way to facilitate trade. And I'm hopeful for a number of reasons, three really brief ones. One is the work of the Senator and people like you who are seeking to work in a collaborative way to move the ball forward. It really does give a framework for us as implementers, if you will, to be able to do our work. The second is young people, actually. I really think I go around the world, and we talked about high school students, but really have the opportunity to meet young people, sometimes who are operating in very difficult circumstances, yet they continue to adapt, they continue to create, they continue to push. And I see that here, and I see that around the world. So that gives me a lot of hope. And the last thing I'll say that gives me the sense of optimism is frankly our resilience. There's a lot that is going on in the world, and I see this resilience just in ordinary people. And I think that with that, well, really we can do anything. We just have to put our minds to it and be open-eyed and clear-eyed about the challenges, but always come to it with the best of intent and not assuming bad intent.
Well, having said that, I'm going to assume bad intent for a minute. Actually, I want to urge all of you here and all of the people who are watching online to engage, to vote, yes, but no, to engage in the conversations. We're about to go back to Washington, and there's going to be a fight about whether we're going to pass a budget to fund the government or pass a continuing resolution, or whether we're going to shut down the government again. And there has been a fight. Some of you here may remember several years ago when there was a long fight for lasting almost 2 years about whether we were going to continue to fund the Exim Bank and appoint people to make sure that the Exim Bank could actually operate. Right now, we have multiple ambassadorial nominees who are on hold because there are various senators who don't want to appoint ambassadors because they don't want to allow the administration currently to have any people in place. And it's important for us to point out that this is not about whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. This is about what is in the best interest of the United States and making sure that we have diplomats on the ground who can defend America's interests in countries around the world is absolutely critical. And I'll guarantee you that the People's Republic of China is not having those debates. They have more diplomats on the ground than the United States does. And making sure that we fund agencies like USTDA, like the Exim Bank, those agencies that help us is in our national security. And we need to remind people. You know, I remember having a conversation with the former Prime Minister of Greece back a number of years ago. And we were talking about funding that they were trying to get for a port in Greece. And he said, you know, we came to the United States and you all wouldn't help us. So we went to the EU wouldn't help us. But China said, you know, you can take our money. Now, for all the reasons that you talked about, they're not happy about having done business with China. But that's the reality. And we need to wake up and continue to operate in the best interest of the United States, which means supporting our allies and partners, means funding the kind of trade efforts that USTDA is doing. It means ensuring that we have diplomats on the ground who can defend America. That is in the interest of the United States, and we need to support that. And I hope you all will help us with that.
Well, thank you, Senator Shaheen, Director Ebong, for joining us here tonight for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for everyone joining us here in person and online, whether you're watching live or the recording. Thank you to the Carsey School, the Department of Political Science and International Affairs, and the Center for Business Analytics for your partnership. We really appreciate your help in making this wonderful conversation happen. We look forward to seeing you all at future events. We will be releasing more of our fall schedule in the coming weeks, so be on the lookout for that. And I'll turn it over to Stephen for a final word.
Really, really fast here. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to the senator and to the director. All of the headlines so often go out to the hard security interests, to the Ukraine and Russia, right? But so much of the work that gets done in international public policy and that advocates for American interests and that moves ourselves forward is occurring in these areas that don't always make the headlines, but they're critically important. And so this conversation, I think, really illuminated that. I'm very grateful for it. The one other plug that I'll give you is if you're a high school student, go to college, come to the University of New Hampshire, and get a master's degree with the Carsey School of Public Policy. I'll leave it at that. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.